Tonight, a decision by a grand jury, reactions: violent, angry, peaceful, determined. A city under the spotlight, a town in crisis, a special commission with a lot of difficult work ahead. The shots fired that August day killed Michael Brown. Officer Darren Wilson will not be charged. In many ways, that now seems like only the beginning of the story. Good evening, I'm Jim Kirchherr. We know there's a lot of coverage about Ferguson, and we're not here to bring you the latest breaking news. Still, despite the expectations and preparations, even negotiations, there's been unrest, violence, and destruction. And there's now a lot of questioning and second-guessing about how this might have been handled differently. There's also been, and will continue to be, other kinds of protest and action. There's a lot of work to be done, and we will hear tonight from some of the members of the Ferguson Commission. They and others will be working on the long simmering issues that boiled over after the shooting death of Michael Brown, things that cannot be decided by a grand jury. But that's where we start tonight. It had been a long time coming, a long time for the pressure to build. But St. Louis County Prosecuting Attorney Bob McCullough was about to bring the guessing, the speculation to an end. Before a live camera and microphones, he announced the grand jury's decision in the case of Officer Darren Wilson's shooting of Michael Brown. After a long preamble, the news might have slipped right by if you weren't listening carefully. But of course, everybody was.
They determined that no probable cause exists to file any charge against Officer Wilson and returned a no true bill on each of the 5 indictments.
Grand jury members and proceedings are not public knowledge. We do know this: there were 6 white men, 1 black man, 3 white women, 2 black women. They had been routinely selected back in May, months before the shooting, but they heard far more evidence than they would in a normal case. In another highly unusual move, McCullough immediately released transcripts of the testimony. He said the grand jurors heard from 60 witnesses. And unlike high-profile jury trials, they were not sequestered but free to go home, see the news coverage, know what was at stake. But they were also under instructions to make their decision based only on the evidence presented.
But you need to keep in mind that these grand jurors poured their hearts and souls into this process. You know, their term was scheduled to end in early September, and they gave up their lives. They put their lives on hold. They put their families on hold. They put everything on hold so that they could come in and do their civic duty. And it was a very emotional process for them.
To indict Officer Wilson on any charge would have taken 9 out of 12 votes. The final vote after 2 days of deliberation is secret, but there were not enough votes to put him on trial. There was an immediate reaction as soon as word spread that Officer Wilson would walk free. Anne-Marie Berger picks up the story from there.
In Ferguson, after the announcement that the grand jury would not indict Officer Darren Wilson, the images of burning and looting and tear gas spread around the world. Outside the courthouse in Clayton, it was a different scene, a small, peaceful crowd, but the disappointment was the same. They just announced that there was no indictment.
I can't explain it right now. I can't explain it right now. I just found that out. I can't explain it right now. I cannot. I'm for both sides. I am. I'm for both sides. I'm up for both sides. I'll tell you the honest God truth. I'm for both sides. I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
I feel it's messed up. Like, he was supposed to go to jail. If that was a black person doing that, boom, he got locked up quick. Like, just like that.
What can we as a community do you think, to move forward, to create change?
I don't even know right now. My head just rambling.
While some may not know where to go from here, others have given this a lot of thought. Elizabeth Vega is a visible community organizer and activist in this movement, most notably known for the protest during the St. Louis Symphony performance at Powell Hall.
Justice for my crown is justice for us all.
Vega believes the first thing our community can do is realize there's a problem.
The fragile scab of racial injustice in this country was peeled off. And we see it systemically and on multiple levels. We see schools that are basically apartheid school systems. We see, testing valued over critical thinking and learning. We see poverty, all of those issues, and they're all related to the fact that we live in a society that has at its very core systemic and institutional racism. And so we need to address that. And part of the way of addressing it is acknowledging it.
Show me what democracy looks like. This is what democracy looks like.
The day after the grand jury announcement and an evening of violence and destruction, demonstrators marched through downtown St. Louis.
The people united will never be defeated.
Reverend John Stratton is a priest at Christ Church Cathedral.
We are at the United States Courthouse demanding justice. What happened yesterday we believe is not right. We believe it shows that black lives do not matter to those who are in power. We want to say that black lives do matter, and that it's not right to gun people down the street who are unarmed.
Not everyone agrees this is about diminishing the value of black lives, but about evidence and facts, as Bob McCullough stated Monday night.
But all decisions in the criminal justice system must be determined by the physical and scientific evidence and the credible testimony corroborated by that evidence, not in response to public outcry or for political expediency.
The march in downtown St. Louis Tuesday continued through the streets, eventually shutting down Interstate 70, and again today, resulting in 2 arrests at City Hall. While this is a region divided, there is a call and a need for open dialogue and understanding from all people.
Just stop it all. Stop it all. We all need to come together and make a better world. There's a whole lot to be done. A whole lot to be done now. If we only can get this world to everybody, I wouldn't care if you was purple, blue, pink, yellow, or maroon, just get along with each other, because no one's better than nobody else. I don't care how much money and how much you don't have. We still are human beings, and we must get along. Yeah.
St. Louis and Ferguson are all over the news again, all over the world. The national and international reporters are doing their jobs, and when they move on, this will again be a local story. And there has been a lot of reporting of the work that's being done, some of it in public, much of it in private. The airing of this community's dirty laundry, racism, segregation, police community relations, deep social, educational, and economic divides. Last week, Governor Nixon appointed 16 people to the Ferguson Commission to study the issues raised by the shooting death of Mike Brown and to come up with recommendations to address them.
They bring to the table a rich diversity of life experience and points of views. They include business owners and not-for-profit leaders, teachers and lawyers, police officers and community activists, pastors and public servants.
The commission co-chairs are the Reverend Starsky Wilson of the Deaconess Foundation and former Unigroup President Rich McClure. The commission will submit a final report by September of next year. So it's really been not even 2 days since the grand jury. What's those last couple of days been like for you guys?
Well, there have been late nights, both trying to be thoughtful about what's going on in our community, trying to be present as in as many places as we could, to be with those who are really kind of trying to be prayerfully reflective about what's going on, but also in some cases grieving. So these have been long nights, long days, but then also opportunities to be thoughtful about the work that we have ahead, in crafting some and stewarding some of the energy that we have now into some positive change by focusing on the work of the commission.
I mean, everybody knew something was coming. We knew a grand jury decision was coming. Is there a sense that this is a greater setback, perhaps, than you've been hoping for?
Well, the tragedy in Ferguson is a vivid example of many issues. And so whichever way the grand jury decision went, those issues are there. and they're still there, and they were there since August 9th. They were there before August 9th in many cases. And so what we need to do as a region is to take the energy and the passion, the anger, the frustration, all the things that are coming out here, grieving, and say, you know, this is a time for our region to come together and look for positive change and look for things that need to be addressed.
Let me interrupt you, is it too early at this point for real healing?
I wouldn't say it's too early. I mean, quite frankly, as we think about the work of the commission, it's not just about this case. And quite frankly, it's not just about this particular, it's not a verdict, but the announcement of no true bill. It's really about the issues that led to this particular shooting that have been clearly exposed by it, including the divisions that we see in our community based upon geography, based upon racial and ethnic lines, the disparities that we see that have been exposed in everything from community policing, community and police relations to how our young people grow up and what school districts they grow up in. All of these things have been exposed, and we've been thinking about them and acting and speaking about them differently the last 109 days than we were before. So now it's time to do something about those.
What's the next step? You guys are co-chairs of the commission. What's the next step for the actual commission? Have you guys met yet?
We are. The commission just met when the governor announced the commission, but we will meet for our first meeting on Monday at noon at the Ferguson Community Center, and then we'll be meeting regularly.
You guys must know how a lot of people feel about blue ribbon commissions and studies that might go on a shelf. You must have heard that, maybe you've thought that yourself. How do you make this commission different than just another good public relations move for a lot of people?
Yeah, first of all, we've got to take action where there's opportunity. So I think if we wait until September 15th to submit a report, then we would have not fulfilled the expectations of a community that needs someone to steward some positive change.
So we're going to hear from this commission before the final report.
Absolutely. I mean, there'll be things, once we've fully litigated an issue and we have a sense that there is a positive recommendation and a policy solution to be had, then we're going to speak on that. We're going to offer it up. We don't want to lose the opportunity of timing based on certain either legislative or other kind of official calendar. So we want to make sure that we engage once we've gotten to what we believe is a positive policy solution.
Great. Rich McClure, Starsky Wilson, thanks for your time today, and thanks for the hard work ahead.
Thank you very much.
We've heard a lot from community leaders, public officials, pundits, and protesters. And for a long time, we've also been doing what so many people said we should all be doing, listening to young people. This is just part of a long conversation Anne-Marie Berger had before the grand jury decision.
We are about 3 weeks, after the police shooting death of Michael Brown. What's the temperature in the room? What are you all thinking and feeling at this point?
To me, I just still feel real unrest about the whole situation.
I'm still very much involved with the case, but now I'm starting to think, okay, what do we do next as far as legislation and laws and getting control of the situation that brought us to this point.
How can Ferguson build from this? How can Ferguson get better from this? And not only Ferguson, the whole city of St. Louis, because it's an ongoing problem that's happened way too much. It's still happening.
I've been stopped probably since I was like 12 or 13. People want to see your ID, make sure you're not doing nothing.
Is this the biggest issue? Is it a black citizen, white citizen thing, or is the issue at hand that needs to be addressed is the relationship between law enforcement and African American citizens?
There's just a socialization that says that, more specifically, dark-skinned African American males are dangerous people.
As a whole, I feel like a lot of people lack empathy and they have no desire to put themselves in someone else's shoes.
Socially, we grow up within an environment where our parents have to. And when I say have to, they have to say, listen, you can be killed if you don't do X, Y, and Z. So I need you to do this if you ever encounter a law enforcement or anybody who has power and has a gun on their hip.
If your only confrontations with the police have been peaceful and you felt respected, then you can't put yourself in the shoes of somebody who, whenever they see a police officer, they are more nervous, they feel more nervous than protected. And that's just how we feel as a people. In St. Louis, we've been feeling that for a long time.
It's almost like you assume the criminal until you prove you're not.
There's been so many reports about, well, there's no diversity in the police force and in, you know, the political landscape. But at the same time, it's a vicious cycle, because why, especially in the African American community, why are they going to get involved if they don't see any respect being shown to them?
And I would second that. Like, seeing everything that I've seen, I would have no interest in being a police officer, because, yeah, I feel like that's not a place for me.
I'm surprised to hear you say that. It doesn't motivate young people to say, I want to do that and change it.
That seems impossible.
It's impossible? I've heard this a lot. I've talked to clergy, I've talked to those a generation ahead of you, and they've all sort of said the same word, that our young people have no hope. They feel hopeless. And I have to say, listening to you guys talk, they're right. I don't feel like there's any hope going on right here. Am I wrong?
It's tiring, and you can't give up hope. We're not hopeless. I mean, I've graduated, he graduated, he's doing it. We're all doing stuff. We're not hopeless, but in the same token, it's just like, you know, do I really just want to sit and think about like this is all I got to sit and think about all the time? Something that you didn't even choose. You didn't choose. And even like, you know, I'm sure it's tiring if you're a woman. Women still aren't paid equally, but that's tiring.
I feel like where we feel hopeless is the way that the system is set up. The system is set up to be racist, and I mean, everybody doesn't want to accept that, but it is. The structuralized racism, I feel like, is a bigger problem than the individuals.
How important is getting people to the polls within the African American community? Where's the importance? How important?
I didn't really realize up until a few years ago how serious local politics are and the impact that it actually has on my everyday life. I mean, the presidential election, that's the biggest election, obviously, but I mean, the president can't just come and send the attorney general down here every single time somebody gets shot or any time something horrible happens. We have to vote people into office locally who can just come down here, drive from Jefferson City and just come down here and make those changes.
Who are we going to vote for? Like, is there a candidate that shares my reality?
So maybe it may be on us, but it's also on the people that are not trying to reach us. You know, it's not 1985, it's not 1995, it's 2014. It's time to get on Twitter, it's time to get on Facebook, it's time to connect. And this is what happens. Like, this is a perfect example of when you got to disconnect with the citizens in their own community, the politicians, all the way to the governor. You know, Jay Nixon, he doesn't understand why there's a disconnect for the life of him. You can see it on his face. I don't know why they don't like me. It's, come on, man. Like, you don't get it, and that's sad, because it's like, you're the governor.
How do you get him to get it?
He got to get there.
He got to want to.
Yeah, he has to want to get it.
He doesn't want to.
It shouldn't be forced. It should be because I really want to know your reality.
Yeah.
And with politicians, I feel like it feels forced half the time.
Jay Nixon probably like, yeah, I don't come out to vote
Right, we don't
anyway,
vote.
so I don't.
You're not
really
in my
care.
demographic,
Yeah,
so I'm not
you're
worried,
not
yeah.
you're not who I'm trying to get to vote for me anyways, because you don't vote anyways, and if you did, you wouldn't vote for me anyways. So I really don't care.
We could actually move further if we actually come together, because right now it's just everybody wants to do their own thing. You know, I feel this type of way, so I'm going to do this regardless if you disagree with how I feel about this. And I just feel like if we just at least can somehow agree on one thing, then we can go further than where we're at right now.
Part of the reason is people don't like to talk about race because it makes everybody feel uncomfortable.
Don't be afraid of discomfort.
Yeah, no, it feels it's not uncomfortable on our side because it's our reality, and that's what I'm saying. Like you said yourself, you represent yourself. I, Tanel, represent every black man in America. You know what I mean? Because that's how I'm viewed by America.
none of us have had the opportunity to step up.
Or reason to.
Yeah.
We've been living, it's just been dormant. It's been that bottle, like we said. He's probably been feeling the same way since he was 12, but it's never been a reason to break it out, to use that voice.
Is this the silver lining?
This was the catalyst. This was the catalyst for change. So it's not that the community was just mad about Mike Brown. We were just fed up altogether with how it is in St. Louis, and to a certain extent, we had got used to it. We had been used to being scared to drive in North County, and that's why I try to say, like, I'm trying to create, I don't want to get back to normal because I don't want to be scared to drive in North County anymore.
We finished tonight with a visit to the St. Louis suburb where all of this began. And like today's news, there are a lot of sides to this story. This is probably not how the world sees the town that's making all the news. But turn down a street and it's the kind of scene you're likely to find. Ruth Ezell explores this place called Ferguson.
And we didn't have like street addresses or anything like that.
Ruth Brown, whose grandfather settled in Ferguson in the 1880s, knows more than most people about the early days of this city. She's on the board of the Ferguson Historical Society. I met her at one of several homes built by physician Dr. George Case for his family. Ferguson was incorporated in 1894. It was first marketed to St. Louisans as a place to build vacation homes, then as a commuter suburb.
By 1904, during the World's Fair, Ferguson had 42 commuter trains a day. So we were called the Queen City of the Wabash.
January Wabash Park and the street on which it sits is named for the January family. The home of patriarch, businessman, and slave owner Thomas January once stood here, where Ferguson Middle School is now located. Following the end of the Civil War, January freed his slaves and deeded them land north of his estate on 2 adjoining streets, here on Albert Avenue and a stone's throw away on Eddy.
Part of the provisions of the State Emancipation Proclamation was that land be granted to slaves and a way to make a living. They built one of the earliest churches in the area, Mount Olive Baptist Church.
I wonder how many of you in this audience remember this old wood burner with its antique rolling stock, coal oil lamps, and wooden coaches.
This promotional film from the early 1930s, paid for by the local bus company and auto repair shop, shows no indication blacks ever set foot in Ferguson. As was the case throughout the St. Louis area, neighborhoods and schools were segregated. On the day of the funeral for Michael Brown, the African-American teenager shot to death by a white Ferguson police officer, we paid a visit to someone whose historical perspective on race relations in Ferguson is very personal.
Early on in Kirchherr, we had a doctor out there, we had a dentist, we had a furniture store.
78-year-old Joseph Wells is a native of Kinloch, the oldest community in Missouri incorporated by African Americans. It's also adjacent to Ferguson. Wells once served as Kinloch's mayor and was the first black to be elected to the Ferguson-Florissant School District Board of Education. He grew up at a time when Ferguson was referred to as a sundown town.
As kids, we go over there to cut grass, make money, make us a little money. And but we had to make sure we was out of there before the sun went down, because they didn't want no blacks in Ferguson with the sun down. If you did, the police would just take you and lock you up. There wasn't nothing you could do about it, They just make it hard on your parents because they want you to pay a fine to get out, and all that.
This is Suburban Avenue. It runs along the southern borders of Ferguson and Kinloch. Joseph Wells remembers the days when a streetcar line ran along here. But in 1975, after the streetcars gave way to motor vehicle traffic, a Ferguson city councilman went to great lengths to stop the flow of traffic between the two communities.
And Ferguson blocked the street off put stones and bricks and all that. I mean, them big heavy things. You need a crane or something to move them with, you know, across there.
He wanted to build a 10-foot tall chain link fence all along the border between Ferguson and Kinloch. Well, exactly in the 1970s, you've got to be kidding, right? He was an extremist, and he put up a barricade down when the street pavement went through, but he didn't want any traffic coming through. The mayor of Kinloch had requested that that be opened up and for better access for Kinloch residents. Our mayor knew that that was the only thing to do.
Author and historian Dr. John Wright.
Many of the people who lived around Ferguson are still alive who were born and lived during the Jim Crow era of Ferguson. Many of them have moved into Ferguson. With them also, they took with them the stories. And they have children, and if they're being harassed by the police, those stories keep popping up.
I would forego the liquid smoke.
Really, I like the flavor.
If you're going to do that, then get the pit going for just a half hour or so.
Really?
Just put a little smoke on it, then put it in the oven.
The advice on meat preparation is courtesy of Gary Crump. He's the owner of Paul's Market in Ferguson, founded in 1959 by Crump's father, Paul.
And there's that's the old building right here with the meat counter. Could you imagine that?
Crump's award-winning third-generation family business is deeply woven into Ferguson's cultural fabric. It draws customers who come to connect with neighbors as much as they do to shop. And it's that kind of old-school community engagement that could lead Ferguson to a promising future.
We have to keep doing what we're doing, and we have every individual that lives in this community, every individual that lives in this county, every individual that lives in this state. We have a choice to make. How are you going to improve yourself to improve your neighbor?
What's going on? How you doing today? I'm thinking.
Our churches have to get more involved. We just can't worship. Jesus said, get out among the people.
Joseph Wells says, get out to the polls.
It is 100% the most important tool we have is voting. And I don't care how you get out and how you scream and tell people to vote and say, well, it's not going to make no difference no way. That's not true. You've got to get out and vote.
My mother-in-law used to have a saying that old age isn't for sissies. And I think we could say diversity is like old age. It is not for sissies. And I think it's something we all have to work at very hard, knowing that every person deserves respect and manners and is as good and worthy as you are.
As the dust settles and the smoke clears, there's going to be a lot of work to do, and we at the 9 Network will try to do our part to keep track and take stock, to convene, engage, listen, and report the best we can. We will be back next week for a special Stay Tuned Thursday at 8 o'clock following Donnybrook Your Turn. I'm Jim Kirchherr. Thanks for joining us.